Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our first in the 2025 webinar series by APA Ohio's Cleveland section. My name is Patrick Hewitt, and I am the Section Vice Director for Professional Development of APA Cleveland, and you are joining us for today's webinar, New Community Authorities and Underutilized Tool for Real Estate Development. As we get started, thank you so much to all of you for attending and for our speakers today. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be reserving some time at the end to answer a question and answer. If you do have a question, we ask that you click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, write your question in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can. On behalf of APA Cleveland, thank you so much for joining. This is your APA Cleveland leadership team, including our section director, Amy Snell-Yost, myself, Schnur Kushner, Krista Piserchik, Arthur Schmidt, Kim Lieber, Laura Mendez-Ortiz, Nicholas Miller, and Cameron Roberts. Since we've got you, we would like to talk about a couple other section updates, as well as larger APA Ohio and APA National events that are coming up. We hope that you are already booked to go to APA National's Planning Conference in Denver, Colorado at the end of this month. But we are also hosting APA Cleveland's Planning and Zoning Workshop on May 15th. That will be held at the Independence Conference Center. We are also presently open for proposals. The original close date for section proposals was Friday. We have extended that. You can submit any proposals at the website there, ohioplanning.org/Cleveland Workshop. Registration begins March 31st and sponsorships are due by April 18th. We're also excited to be hosting the September 24th through 26th APA Ohio Planning Conference in Toledo later this year. If you are not already getting APA Cleveland emails, please check to make sure that you are signed up and that the email is in your safe senders list. We've got some other smaller events coming up as well that we're very excited about. On July 19th, an APA summer picnic, which will be held at the Memphis shelter of the Cleveland Metro Parks Big Creek Reservation. We also have been doing monthly planner socials, and we are doing a cleanup crawl later this summer where we'll be doing some volunteer work as well. On behalf of Cleveland's section of APA Ohio, we want to thank both you and our co-sponsor, the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. This webinar is available for CM credits for those of you looking for that, and the CM credit number is 930-7115. With that, I'm very excited for our speakers today. We've got three folks from Bricker Graydon, the first of whom is Brendan Hale. Brendan is a seasoned attorney in Bricker Graydon's political subdivision group. He has extensive experience handling a variety of municipal law issues, including counseling cities and private entities on economic development transactions, public finance, legislation, eminent domain, annexation, land use, and zoning. Brendan is also well-versed in handling litigation matters for public and private clients in federal and state courts, including land use and zoning disputes, complex commercial class actions, and multi-district litigation. In his previous position as the law director for the city of Sandusky, Brendan was the chief legal officer for the city, overseeing all civil litigation, legal transactions, legislation, and advising city officials on a wide variety of municipal law issues. As law director, Brendan was the lead attorney managing economic development projects that involved public financing, incentives, and tax abatement, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity for the city. Thanks for being here today, Brendan. We also have Robert McCarthy. Robert represents governmental entities, nonprofit organizations, and financial institutions in connection with municipal bond transactions. In addition, Rob has extensive experience working with public and private clients in establishing and managing economic development incentives and special purpose districts, including joint economic development districts and new community authorities. In addition to his work as bond counsel, Rob works with public and private clients to establish and manage economic development programs, including JEDs, NCAs, and tax increment financing. He also negotiates economic development incentives on behalf of school districts and other public and private parties. And finally, Colin Calvis. Colin practices public finance and economic development law. Colin serves political subdivisions, financial institutions, developers, and special purpose districts, such as special improvement districts and new community authorities in many different capacities. He regularly represents clients in matters related to the issuance of bonds, securities law, federal income tax law, contracts, real property acquisition, development, and governmental revenues. Colin has been at the forefront of developing property assessed clean energy or PACE financing in Ohio. His PACE efforts include serving as counsel to PACE administrators and energy special improvement districts throughout Ohio, as well as serving as bond counsel and lenders counsel to Ohio port authorities and other financial institutions that finance energy efficiency and clean energy projects through PACE. Other significant portions of Colin's practice include Port Authority Common Bond Fund financing and the negotiation, implementation, and monetization of economic development tools like tax increment financing, special assessments, community redevelopment area or CRA abatements, and new community authority charges. Thanks to all three of you for agreeing to be part of this webinar today. With that, I will end my section and turn it over to our presenters. Take it away, gents.
Thanks, Patrick. While we get our presentation up, I just want to say on behalf of everyone at Bricker Graydon, we really appreciate the APA for inviting us. This is an exciting topic. Well, at least I think the three of us think it's an exciting topic. I guess you can withhold judgment until the end. If we put you to sleep, then I apologize in advance. Like Patrick said, my name is Brendan Heil. I've never actually listened to my entire bio read out before, but I appreciate it. So I don't know, Robert, Colin, do you have any more introduction before I dive in? All right. All right. Colin, you want to... Next slide. Thank you. So what we're going to talk about today, we're here to talk about new community authorities. So we're going to cover what a new community authority is, just generally how they're created, what they are, what they can do. We're also going to talk about why NCAs are actually beneficial, because we're with our lovely partners in the planning field. We wanted to also kind of focus a little bit on how NCAs can work with all of the efforts that you all do on zoning, land use, comprehensive master plans, things like that. And then the last part of our presentation is going to just be some examples. We have about, I don't know, 8 to 10 examples of existing NCAs and that are kind of show the range of uses that you can have for an NCA, because it is an incredibly flexible tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and it has morphed over the years into one of probably the most flexible tools for certain types of development. And you're going to see a lot of different ways that it's been utilized across Ohio. With that, I think we're going to kick it over to the next slide. Yeah. But to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about. So at its core, a new community authority is basically kind of has an economic development superpower that allows you to put on spot specific charges that without them, the type of development you would get is more of kind of your cookie cutter. This is an example of, pretty cookie cutter suburban development. If it's able to be financed, it complies with zoning rules. It's, we can build this without a lot of additional extra incentives. But I don't know about you, but I really enjoy living around things that I like to go to, parks, stadiums, or even just like, grocery stores and other things that are necessary for live. And one of the nice things about NCAs is that because of the powers that it has to finance things, you can go from really generic developments to really, really, really amenitized developments. It's really about enhancing the type and quality of developments that you can get. And that looks totally different in totally different contexts. It can be, a housing development that has bike trails and parks and a baseball field in this picture, or it can be commercial developments where you're building the infrastructure and the water, the sewer, and the power to make sure that it's successful. With that, I'm going to pass it along to the next slide, and I think to Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. So a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of a new community authority. A new community authority is a new separate governmental entity. It is a full-blown political subdivision, and its main function is to really encourage development activity, which is one of the main reasons that we're excited to talk about this tool with this group in particular, because from the lens of planning, an NCA is a very effective way to formalize what is typically a public-private partnership to really ensure orderly development or redevelopment and encourage all the kinds of development activity that stakeholders want to see in a particular area. What the NCA really does is constitute a voluntary development tool that, again, uses tax-like charges to finance and maintain broad categories of infrastructure and also to put on certain kinds of community programming. So again, from the lens of sort of planning and land use, an NCA is an effective way to provide not just a stick of regulations on how an area has to be developed, but also a carrot of a financing mechanism that can help to pay for the costs of that development that folks want to see. So Rob is going to talk a little bit more about who might be involved in the formation of an NCA.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And so continuing on those nuts and bolts, the NCA itself has essentially two parties on the front end. The one is the developer, and use developer with quotation marks because although historically it has been a private developer or landowner, we'll talk about examples where more recently it's been a local government. But regardless, the developer needs to be a party that owns or controls the site where the NCA will be formed, and control can be evidenced by long-term leases. That party petitions the local government to form the NCA, and the local government in this case is referred to as an organizational board. And you have to follow the statute to determine who that would be. 9 times out of 10, it's this local city council, but there are circumstances obviously developing outside a city where that's not the case. And then the third party, those are the two parties on the front end. The third party is whoever's paying the charge. We'll talk more later about the charge. That's where the revenue comes from the NCA. Oftentimes it is the developer, but oftentimes it's not. And depending on the type of charge, it can be a way the developer passes the payment back to tenants or to users of the site.
So how do we actually create one of these? There is a very specific statutory process. As Rob just explained, there's a statutory developer, which is oftentimes an actual, private developer, or it can be actually the local municipality. That developer files an actual petition, a document with the organizational board. Again, as Rob explained, city council, county commissioners, or a board of township trustees. What I like to think of a petition as is basically the charter or the constitution of the NCA. It is the foundational document. You are outlining, generally in broadest terms possible, all of the things that the NCA can do and giving it the initial authority to levy those charges. It also has to contain a number of statutorily required information. So it has to have a development plan. These are meant to be a tool to create an orderly development, an organized development in a district. So it also has to explain exactly where the NCA is going to be. Now that does not have to be contiguous, but the petition creates the NCA over very specific properties that are actually controlled by the developer, and the petition has to lay that out. So you take this petition and you submit it. You submit it to the city. We'll use the city experience because I think for APA Cleveland, you're mostly dealing with cities. So you submit it to city council. You actually file it with them. At that point, city council has to have a hearing within 30 to 45 days of the receipt of the petition. And at that hearing, city council holds a public hearing, and it basically you're trying to determine if the NCA district is conducive to public health, safety, convenience, and welfare. So there's a statutory standard you're trying to meet. In essence, it's the time for city council to basically vet: is this a good idea? Get some public feedback, understand what is the point of this. Why are we creating this, and what's it going to do? That happens at the public hearing. At that point, after the public hearing, then the organizational board or city council can pass legislation actually approving and creating that NCA. There are some overall parameters with NCAs, and it's all found in lovely Chapter 349 of the Revised Code, which is a county chapter, and we can answer that from a historical quirk as to why that is. But basically, an NCA is really flexible in the sense that it can be on one parcel, or it can be on multiple parcels. Those parcels don't have to be contiguous. You could actually add property over time. You would have to go through the same process that you did to create the NCA to add additional property. And additionally, like Rob explained, one of the key, one of the checks on this on the kind of the power of the NCA is that in order for your property to be included in the NCA, you actually have to affirmatively consent to it. So the developer can add additional properties that it controls, or third parties could consent to join the NCA, but they have to affirmatively consent. You cannot unilaterally impose an NCA on a non-consenting property owner. It's just not an option. NCAs historically were a housing development tool. They were historically a large-scale greenfield suburban housing development tool. They have become so much more flexible. It is no longer required that you need to have housing in an NCA. You can do them for commercial or industrial sites. You can partner them with a number of other incentives, and we'll get more into that. But basically, yes, there's a statutory framework and there's a very specific process for creating these. But keep in mind, one of the really, really, really interesting things about NCAs is the level of flexibility that they provide in designing a development plan.
Yep. And once you have your NCA formed, what's it going to be doing? And to Brendan's point about some flexibility in an NCA, the way that the NCA provides that carrot for incentivizing development and making development work has also become very flexible over time. The primary way that an NCA encourages development is by levying what is called a community development charge on the property within the district. Again, a community development charge is a tax-like item that has to be paid by certain owners of property and certain users of different types of facilities within an NCA. And over time, the statute has evolved a little bit from a focus on property-based charges that really worked like real property taxes, typically even maybe on a millage basis against assessed valuation of property, to now also include a number of other kinds of charges that an NCA can levy within its territory. Those include things that function basically as sales taxes, hotel bed taxes, and also other sorts of fees. Think of these as kind of just user fees on something like a parking facility or the use of a public stadium or concert venue or something like that. All of those kinds of charges are typically assessed and collected potentially primarily through some direct collection mechanisms, but the ultimate enforcement mechanism for all of those kinds of charges is actually certification to the county auditor or fiscal officer for placement on property tax bills and collection and enforcement that way. So in that way, this could function as a little bit like something along the lines of a lawn mowing fee that gets assessed against a property owner, doesn't get paid, and then it ends up certified over to the county auditor. Some of these kinds of NCA charges have the same type of enforcement mechanism. And that's important because what the enforcement mechanism and the collection mechanism allow the NCA to do is to issue bonds in support of development within the territory. So what the bonds do is allow the NCA to pledge the future collections of the NCA charges to bring money into the present and use that money to actually pay for development costs, whether those are for public infrastructure or in certain circumstances and in certain NCAs, it can also be for different kinds of service provision. That might be things like enhanced cleaning services. It might be landscaping. It could also include some kind of public programming and things of that nature. Historically, though, NCAs have really focused on financing infrastructure and public improvements. And, Rob, what are some of those improvements historically looked like that NCAs are involved with?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So generally, we're looking for improvements that are in addition to the infrastructure services that otherwise would be provided, because of course the property owners or the users are paying that additional community development charge. The scope is extremely broad. We're looking for improvements or services that have a public benefit. Public meaning not just to one specific user, but to the NCA as a whole, in some cases beyond. Some of them are very classic improvements like streets, water, sewer, parking garages, but we've seen very creative uses of the NCA, sort of public-private plazas, public-private event centers, spaces, stadiums, Colin mentioned, you name it. If there's a public element to it and there's a capital improvement, typically there's a way to involve the NCA as an owner or a long-term lessee and establish the public ownership right.
I was muted. So overall, what we're basically describing here is a tool that has very flexible powers and advantages. It is historically, and it doesn't have to be now, it is historically one of the truest forms of a public-private partnership. The NCA, like Colin and Rob described, is a separate political subdivision. It is a governmental entity. You're subject to audit, a bunch of other things. So it has to be controlled by a board, and that board has to be majority appointed by the local government in order for it to take advantage of certain things and be a governmental entity. Usually, the minority of board seats are appointed by the statutory developer, the private entity doing the development. However, it is now also a tool that can be completely municipal run. And actually, the first example of these is an NCA that we just created that we'll talk about a little bit more, where the city of Cleveland was both the statutory developer and the local government entity. So all of the board seats are appointed by public entities. Like Colin described, that NCA board levies those charges. So you have very flexible charge parameters. So you can be really creative. We've seen lots of different ways of doing this, including, a square footage charge on just the square footage of space. But all this is basically intentional to finance the improvements, going back to that first slide that I talked about. How do we create amenities to create better living spaces or more productive commercial spaces? So that's kind of an overarching overview of NCA's powers and advantage. We're going to start getting into some of the ways it can interact with planning. Okay, so these are the next couple slides are just completely theoretical discussions. Well, mostly theoretical discussions. But there's been a lot of work. Shout out to Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. I think the cities of like Euclid and South Euclid were the first pilots for this. But I know that Patrick and his team and a number of folks have done single-family zoning analysis in Cuyahoga County. And I live in the city of Cleveland. I don't know if this 12,000 number is accurate, but it's been cited to me by a number of people. But there's supposedly 12,000 vacant single-family lots in Cleveland. When Cuyahoga County Planning Commission did this single-family zoning analysis of some first suburbs, in the jurisdictions that they surveyed, there were 53,000 vacant lots. What the planners did was start working, and one of the issues with those is obviously I do some zoning work. One of the issues is that our zoning codes are plopped down on a built environment that was built in like the turn of the 20th century. And we plopped a 60s style zoning code on it with suburban style setbacks, a lot of things. So there are so many buildings, as you all know, there are so many buildings that exist but do not fit the zoning. So we're getting jurisdictions that are doing these great updates on their zoning codes to make it easier to build single family housing. The rub comes, and that started happening, but even in states that are even further ahead of us on zoning reform, we are not seeing an explosion of single family home building. We're seeing a marginal uptick. And part of the reason is you still got to find a way to pay for it, especially if you want to make it affordable to a median income or workforce housing. Historically, the way we've handled trying to pay for single family development is tax abatement, down payment assistance, and sometimes jurisdictions will waive permit and fee waivers. And that has, again, it's necessary, it's helpful, but it is maybe not enough to really do this at scale. And one of the things that we've had some very preliminary discussions with different communities, or hypothetically talked about it with land banks and other thing, is like, how do you actually put money behind large scale single family redevelopment? In essence, what if we could do more? Well, we just explained to you some of the superpowers that NCAs have. You could go through all of this wonderful planning and zoning work and basically understand you have a bunch of buildable lots that you've now made it easy to build on through zoning reform, and you just have to find a way to help finance it. An NCA can be paired with a tax abatement. So you could create a tax abatement program through a CRA in your community. You could have that be somewhere between, it could be up to a 15 or 100% tax abatement. And what you could do with an NCA, because the properties don't have to be contiguous, is you could say every place we're going to build a single family home, we can put a little NCA charge, like a property millage on. That can start generating revenue. And because the NCA is so flexible in what it can spend it on, you can build the infrastructure to those sites that maybe they need some, or you can help actually pay for the housing. The only issue is that you really need to do it at scale in order for it to. But basically, you're almost in essence creating a self-sustaining revolving loan fund through an NCA charge, because we've seen this a lot of places where we get one-time gap assistance to build single-family homes, but once that you got $5 million, and once the $5 million runs out, you've only built 50 homes or whatever it is. Well, how do you keep coming back to the well? A revolving charge that's still a very, 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 very nice net abatement to the property owner is one of those as a potential idea. So you're seeing where all of that housing work that planners and planning and zoning folks are doing merges with the economic development tool to actually work with the community's vision to build housing. And this is a single family example. Okay, well, what about bigger sites? And we actually have an actual example of this in Richmond Heights, which is until recently the only NCA in Cuyahoga County. So you also have large scale developments that need to be redeveloped in Cuyahoga County or the outlying counties. And one of the first things that needs to happen is the fact that the built environment is zoned in a way that is not conducive for the vision of the future use, right? We see this all the time at malls. It's all commercial. There's a bunch of stuff. So I know Cuyahoga County, I literally went to the website and was like looking for good ideas that planners have done, and I found a bunch of stuff. I know that, Cuyahoga County Planning Commission also helped doing a mixed use zoning overlay for places like North Olmsted to have the zoning match what the future vision is. Well, that's great, but how do you actually pay for all of that? And one of the examples we'll talk about later with a mall is Bell Oaks, is the redevelopment of the Richmond Heights Mall. Another way you could look at this as a way to execute on planning and vision, master plans are absolutely wonderful. When I was in Sandusky, we did 3 of them, I think. We did a downtown one, we did a neighborhood one, we did a comprehensive plan. Planning work is great, but like you have to start executing on it. And one of the great ways an NCA can be useful is execution on planning efforts that have taken place over years to find the actual financing to build the amenities and the things that the plan calls for. And this next example, the very first of our examples, is a great example of master plan execution on Cleveland's own lakefront. Colin wants to hit the slide. Oh, nope, sorry, one slide too fast. This is just for point of reference. There are almost 60 now NCAs throughout the state of Ohio. There are only 2 in Cuyahoga County. And the reason is mostly historic, in that you see where most of them are concentrated, which is in the suburban area around Columbus. It's because historically this was a suburban single family house building tool. When it was originally designed, you had to have at least 1,500 acres. I don't know, Colin and Rob, you guys have done a lot of work in Central Ohio. Do you want to add on as to why we've seen this? It really is an underutilized tool in Northeast Ohio, but some of that is just by the fact that it only 6 years ago was it really the law changed so that it has been flexible enough to really be a municipal tool in legacy cities.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think some of that is just the development pattern of Cuyahoga County. The city of Cleveland, for example, ended up with a bunch of suburbs that were incorporated as municipal corporations around it. So there wasn't a whole lot of unincorporated greenfield around kind of the core urban area. Columbus has had sort of a different development pattern. And like you mentioned, this tool used to be really for large greenfield new development in unincorporated territory largely. So I think it's just a historical fact that the development of those 2 areas was just a little bit different. So in the old version of this tool, it was very effective in a place like Columbus and not so much in a place like Cuyahoga County. In the new version of the tool, there's a lot of opportunity somewhere like Cuyahoga County.
For example, are at least Colin, my newest, and it's my favorite. I don't know. He might have a different favorite. This is my favorite NCA. Sorry, everybody else. Um, so I think literally 2 weeks ago, the city of Cleveland created its first new community authority, um, which is designed to execute in part on the lakefront master planning, the North Coast lakefront master planning, which you see a picture of this here. On the other side of the screen, you can actually see. So this is fully intended to be mixed use area, a lot of different charges. There might be a housing component. We don't know. That's down the road. There currently is a stadium. There might not be. We don't know. That's down the road. But there's also, legacy assets, and it shows the flexibility of the tool. And also, this was a completely municipal driven NCA. So that's a change again that is only about 7 years old. And so the city of Cleveland is both the statutory developer and the organizational board for this. It is, it includes Burke Lakefront Airport. There's just this is kind of the quintessential, how do we redevelop a master planned area in a legacy city? An NCA is a great way to do that because it has the flexibility to design charges to the actual economic activity that will take place down there, and that will allow the city to build the beautiful parks that they're envisioning, all of that public access, make it safer. I mean, I don't like playing Frogger every time I try to walk to the Rock Hall, and all of that. That is really what the NCA is great at. And so this is a great example of a more modern municipal focused NCA. You're going to see a bunch others coming here shortly.
Hey, Rob and Brendan, we have a question in the chat about kind of who actually pays the NCA charges. And I was thinking maybe as a way to address that question, we could kind of talk about that in some of these examples. So Brendan, in this example, who would actually pay the charges in the waterfront NCA?
That's a great question. So the waterfront NCA charges are meant to be passed on as user fees. Potentially, you pay to park. There's a little NCA charge on the parking. Potentially, you pay, any restaurants or future kind of retail activity. There can be a little percentage charge on the bill and all of that, those charges on the economic activity that users who are already paying to use the lakefront would then go to pay for the public amenitization so that there would be free uses as well for folks who just want to come down and enjoy. So it's designed to be a user fee based NCA charge. If there might also be a slight developer based NCA charge if there is any millage on housing development, but that is far down the road. The initial charges are all meant to be user fee based charges.
Yeah, so Colin, that was a really good segue into the next NCA. This is one of the older NCAs in that sort of greenfield area outside Columbus, northwest of Columbus, the Concord Scioto Community Authority. It's been around, I don't know, 15 years, and it is single family homes. And this gets to this question. And basically the developer in going subdivision by subdivision has added each of these properties to an existing NCA. The NCA collects charge from the home buyers each year through the county auditor, and that money is used to pay for a sewer plant that was necessary given the way sewer has been laid out in Delaware County. And in terms of the complexity, under Ohio law, the NCA, first of all, is recorded against the property. But obviously, when you buy a home, you typically don't, look at what's on title. It's required to be disclosed in the purchase contract. And I know, for example, the Columbus Board of Realtors has a specific line for it. I imagine Cuyahoga County has the same or will soon as these start to proliferate. And so it's disclosed. There are questions every year with some of these larger NCAs. There'll be a new home buyer who moves in and says, what is this millage charge that I'm paying? Usually for an NCA, we have kind of a one-pager that we send out with Q&A to explain. The burden is on the developer as they're selling the homes. And then, to disclose it, make sure the home buyers understand. And then to the question of why would anybody agree to this? Well, take this example, and again, that was sewer specific. Some of the other examples will be for other purposes. There was a need, obviously, to get sewer for these large subdivisions. There are different ways to pay for it. The home buyers, it could have been financed a number of different ways, but I think the way to explain it to the home buyers is you're essentially paying your small portion of the debt service on that sewer plant over time, just like if there had been a voted bond issue over this territory. Um, yeah, that is something, it's a good question. It is something that comes up, particularly when there's single family residential involved.
This is another example in Central Ohio. It's a little bit of a smaller site. It's only around 80 acres. It's a little bit more of a focused development. And originally, this site was planned to be largely developed as senior living and multifamily housing. And as part of that, there was a design to have significant internal roadway improvements put into the site, along with a steam loop utility system that would be part of the site to provide heating for most of the different buildings in the site. And an NCA was approved, authorized, formed to help to finance the costs of those kinds of improvements. And this NCA largely uses a property tax-based charge in order to create revenues to pay for those things. This site also provides an example of pairing an NCA with some tax increment financing, where the tax increment financing is providing funding for some of the external roadways that go kind of alongside the site and some improvements to them that were necessary in order to facilitate the new traffic flow that would be coming to this site. And then the NCA charges provide some supplemental revenues, again, for some of those internal things, and also to back up the TIF payments, because TIF payments are value dependent and can change over time. And the NCA charges are able to provide a little bit more of a stable revenue stream in the case of this development. Going from a very small NCA site to the other end of the spectrum to a very large one. This is the Union Village NCA down in Southwest Ohio. And this is probably kind of the original use case or the original idea for why you would use an NCA. As originally conceived, an NCA was almost a substitute for a municipal corporation. It was a way to develop in a very orderly way unincorporated territory without having to incorporate and become a city or village. The Union Village NCA sits over a pretty massive site in township land, and the NCA here has been helpful in facilitating a broad-based mixed-use development that includes substantial amenities. There are a lot of public amenities involved with this site that the NCA charges are helping to finance and pay for. And there was another question in the Q&A about, why a school district or some other stakeholders might be okay with NCAs. For this particular NCA, there was a big question from some of the public safety service providers in the area, because this was going to be a significant new development that was going to have significant new demand on those public safety services. The NCA tool itself does not redirect or take away taxes from other taxing authorities. But what the NCA was able to do in this situation was actually to provide some supplemental revenue to those safety service providers to offset some of the increase in costs that they were going to experience from a development of this magnitude. So shifting focus back to Cuyahoga County, Brendan, here's another example locally, right?
Yes. This is the other NCA in Cuyahoga County. And again, yeah, I think these two NCAs back to back are a really good dichotomy of historic uses, historic purpose of the law versus how it's been modified to be a far more flexible tool for fully built out communities to redevelop underutilized parcels. So Richmond Heights Mall, which is no more, it has been fully demolished at this point, is being redeveloped as a mixed use community. There will be a Meijer, so a grocery store for the community. There will be some commercial outlots, but also over 750 apartments are planned. There's commercial spaces planned. And then there are common areas. So for the actual community, for the residents of the community, there fitness center, pools, common areas, green space, all the parking and internal road network. A big one on this is how do you reorient a sewer system that was built for a mall into a sewer system that is for residential housing? And that's really what the NCA charges are helping to cover is all of that infrastructure needed to support the redevelopment of this mixed use community. This one's also really an interesting design because it is a layer of a CRA, a tax abatement, a TIF, and an NCA. So the first 15 years at this site are tax abated with a pre-94 CRA. So there's a 15-year 100% tax abatement on all the building improvement values. The NCA charge is being designed to monetize that tax abatement. So basically, you're manufacturing a TIF by replacing the abated property values with up to close to the a full amount of the what they would otherwise pay in property taxes in NCA charges in a millage to pay for all of the infrastructure. So the developer is, self-assessing that. This will also allow them to pass on a slight net abatement. And then with all the development, it also will increase revenues for the schools as well. After the first 15 years, then the TIF takes over, and there's a TIF on the site that will work like a normal TIF. And that is monetized to pay down. And what they're going to do is do, upfront bond issuances for each phase to pay for the public infrastructure for each phase. Port authorities will be involved. It really is kind of a perfect storm of a lot of different economic development programs, which shows you how difficult it can be on a site like this to reorient all the public infrastructure, to build the actual housing, to get a Meyer to come to your community. It's a fantastic project. Richmond Heights is a great community, and they're really lucky to see all this development. But it shows just how difficult some of these are in fully built out legacy cities, and how do you make that work? Well, the NCA is integral here to make sure that the infrastructure can support this development. I think there were some more questions in the chat. I don't know if we wanted to. I saw one about oh, they might have gotten answered.
Yep. No, and please keep those questions coming. We're trying to answer some of those by typing back, and then some of those here live. So please keep those coming. Enjoying all the real good engagement here.
I think there was one on how the CRA is monetized. That one might be a good live since it. So literally, it's going to be designed so that the NCA charge will be the same amount of property tax millage as otherwise would have been on the assessed value of the improvements. So normally, the county auditor would do the calculation to create the property tax bill. That amount, which would otherwise be abated because of the CRA, just goes from an actual property taxes to an NCA charge that works like the property taxes, and it will be paid like a pilot, like any other TIF, to the NCA, and then paid out to pay down the bonds. I don't know if Colin or Rob want to explain that in more eloquent terms, but at least that's how it works in my brain.
I like it.
Okay, so the next example is sort of like the North Coast example that Brendan described, but on a much different scale. This is the Galena New Community Authority. I know we've got a couple folks from Delaware County on. Galena is a really beautiful historic village at the northern end of the reservoir on the north end of Columbus in Delaware County. It's got great historic buildings, really nice natural features, good school district, but they know the growth is coming. And 8 or 9 years ago, the village decided, they were one of the first to do this, that they would take advantage of the NCA as a way to have the additional growth that's coming in, pay for to maintain the quality of life that the village wants to maintain. So this goes back to some of Brendan's original discussion about how to tie this into master planning. So this applies to any new subdivision that is added to Galena. Each new home is subject to an 8 mil charge. The way the village has set it up, 4 mills are actually going to the Big Walnut Local School District. The schools, there was an earlier question that Colin answered, the schools didn't have a right to that NCA millage, but Galena decided to offer that as a partnership, and partly in the hopes that future discussions would be easier over incentives, and partly because they realized people were moving because of the good schools, and the schools were going to be overwhelmed. And so if they could provide 4 additional mills, maybe that would help. The other 4 mills the village is retaining The vision has evolved a little bit over time. The original vision was for trails and green space. That's still central to it, but they're looking at other uses as well that benefit some of the new subdivisions as they come in. And again, just to repeat, the village here is the actual developer. So the village formed an NCA on property that it owned. And then as new properties have come forward with development plans, they've been required to join the NCA on the terms that the village established as the developer.
So similar part of the state, also in Delaware County, there is the Berkshire Landing New Community Authority. And this one, we've talked about how in suburban and exurban Columbus, there are a lot of examples of kind of single family NCAs. This one is not really that. This NCA was to facilitate the development of really an outlet mall and some related mixed use development that's taken place kind of around and alongside the outlet mall. And this is an interesting NCA because this was one of the earlier examples of an NCA using some of the more flexible types of NCA charges. This one did not focus only on millage-based property charges, although it did have that component, but it also included the sales tax-like charge on the outlet mall site. In this case, the NCA was really being used to facilitate a lot of really extensive roadway improvements that were necessary in this area, including some improvements to the interchange from the interstate that goes alongside this site. And it also was used in part to pay for a planned new interchange in this area. And we wanted to bring this one up particularly, one, because it highlights the sales tax charge, but also because from a planning perspective, one of the big considerations that this NCA was trying to help solve was traffic problems that they were anticipating with this particular development. And so this is an example of how NCA charges can be directed into financing for improvements that can tackle those kinds of traffic issues. Another more recent and somewhat interesting example in a way that folks are now starting to use the NCA tool that has not historically been the case is the Dayton Arcade New Community Authority. One of the really interesting things about this NCA is that it sits over top of an already built environment. So the Dayton Arcade is a historic asset in downtown Dayton. It's a little bit similar actually to the Cleveland Arcade. One difference is they've got this large rotunda, this kind of round space in the middle rather than that kind of long space that the Cleveland Arcade has. But in any event, there was a significant rehabilitation and redevelopment effort for the Dayton Arcade a number of years ago, and there was kind of the kitchen sink of public financing thrown at that redevelopment effort. But one of the things that was included was a new community authority that has a commercial use square foot charge for different commercial users of the space, and then also the retail charge, the sales tax-like charge on a percentage of all the gross receipts of the businesses that are within the NCA district. This one, again, is interesting because the NCA charges were really used to pay for some really costly enhancements to the facility, including actually some of that glass work that you see there on the roof, but then also for public programming. So one of the things that they do there in the Dayton Arcade is host a public market, and the NCA provides a little bit of supplemental revenue to help with some of those activities. And I think this is our last example. Rob, this is probably the most interesting of all the NCA examples. What's up with the Bridge Park one?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So this is in Dublin, northwest suburb of Columbus. Those of you who've been to Dublin, this was previously a strip mall and a driving range and some 70s era office buildings. This isn't going to happen in every community, but it gives you an idea of, if you want to dream big, the types of things an NCA can be used for. So if you look at this picture, the NCA actually in this case covers both sides of the river, and it was founded 8 or 9 years ago and has a number of different charges that have been described in other examples. So there was a question about monetizing a CRA. There are portions of the development that have a CRA, and instead of paying real property taxes, those properties pay an NCA charge. There are about to be 3 hotels. Guests at those hotels all pay an extra bed tax. There's 2 streets or more of shopping and a little public market. All of those, if you shop at those restaurants and stores, you pay an additional sales tax. All that revenue is pooled into a cooperative agreement arrangement with the City of Dublin and the new Community Authority, and then is pledged to bonds. There have been a number of different things financed, going back to our question, what could be financed? There's 6 parking garages, there's a road network, there's a public market, there's a public event center, all through a series of bonds that are issued through the Port Authority and are supported by NCA as well as TIF revenue. So if you're in I guess the point here again is if you want to dream big, if you have a very big and complicated project, the NCA can be tailored to it. And also if you're in a community that sort of wonders whether it's unproven, this project, I don't know the latest figure. I think there were 600, 700 million that's been invested. So a very, very proven, tested, and successful tool.
Okay, so what have we learned today? I feel like a teacher. So there are a lot of advantages. There are also some disadvantages, and we want to obviously point out both. But what we've talked about is, NCA charges are a great way to fund a high level of amenities or to maintain long-term those amenities or other necessities of development because the charge stays on. It's another way to, attract a level of private investment, similar to a TIF and some other things, because of the lien mechanism that Colin discussed. NCA charges can back bonds. So that's a way to leverage private investment with public investment. One of the nice things about them, as opposed to like a SID or some other special assessments, is all of this is voluntary. Not only is it required, but it's also a nice buy-in, right? You have to basically show a use case to the developer or the owner. Hey, we're going to deliver X, and in return, the charge is going to be imposed on your property. So there's, it's the carrot rather than the stick approach. They can be designed to be user fees. The Bridge Park example is a really good example of this. Like you go out to eat there, you see a little, what is it, like a 0.25% charge that shows up on your bill. 0.5, yeah. So it just shows up just like, any applicable taxes or something else. It's just on the bottom of your bill, so they're getting noticed, but the users are paying for it's a way for new users to pay for the new amenities as opposed to burdening your existing taxpayers with additional charges to pay for the redevelopment. It's a really good way for it to pay for itself, which is really important. And like I said, I live in Cleveland. I do most of my work up here. That's a really important feature, right? We have tough tax climates in most of our jurisdictions. So how do we make sure that new development pays for itself as opposed to burdening existing taxpayers and municipalities? I mentioned this by happenstance in one couple, but the charges are strong enough to do bond financing, and actually the NCA can issue the bonds itself, so it can be a financing tool that way. And NCAs can really amplify local government finances because it's an addition to. These are not a lot of what we do in economic development is we're either removing taxes, we're redirecting taxes, we're working with the existing tax structure, right? Well, NCAs don't affect the existing tax structure. You can layer them with tools, but they don't have to. So it's a way to amplify the existing local government finances as opposed to just simply redirecting or trying to work within that confines, which is a really powerful tool, especially in hard to develop areas like Northeast Ohio. It is not perfect. It is not a magical unicorn that's going to just build beautiful bridge parks all over Ohio. You really do this is not a 1-2 year tool. This is a multi-year commitment. So long-term planning is required. The board is going to exist for not just the phase of the development, but potentially as long as those charges are in place. And that board is going to have ongoing costs, accounting. They have to make sure the charges are working and they're getting remitted correctly. The board has to be managed. There aren't a lot of NCAs that have employees, but perhaps you might, in larger NCAs, actually have employees to manage the ongoing work of the NCA, or a management company or an agreement with somebody. So there is an annual cost to this. The other thing is that it is another layer of governmental oversight and improvement. And that has burdens and of, it has to have meetings. There are approvals that are required on top of the local jurisdiction. So you have to consider some of those things where like it's not a quick fix type of solution. It is really meant to be for like long-term planning of transformative or larger scale projects, or in that single site example I had, ways to scale what otherwise is very hard one-off development. Um, I don't know if Colin or Rob want to add anything else from what they've, from all we've learned of over handling, some 40 or so NCAs across Ohio. If there's any like lessons that they would like to leave folks with, since we have exactly 3 minutes left.
Well, we do have two questions, Brendan.
Oh, okay.
One is, can we revisit the main strategic differences between applying this in a legacy city versus kind of a high demand city? I guess as an initial reaction to that, I would say a lot of the difference there is going to be in who is being charged and what those charges are going to be used for. So often in a high growth area, the charge is going to be passed on probably through a property tax mechanism to the owners of the property, and it's generally going to be used to pay for infrastructure that you've got to get out to the greenfield site that's not already there. So Rob mentioned the Concord Scioto example where the sewer needs to get extended, or we talked about some where the roadways needed to be extended or built, for the first time. In a legacy city situation, often what you have is a pretty well-built environment and a lot of the infrastructure existing, but what you're trying to do is really do amenitization and enhancement. And therefore, as Brendan was just mentioning, you're going to want to try to charge in such a way that the users of those amenities and enhancements are the ones that are primarily paying for it. That's not, cut and dried. I think Rob Bridge Park is an interesting example because they make parking free for everyone who's using the site. But then the cost is when you go into a restaurant or you go into a shop, you've got a little bit of an extra sales tax. That's kind of how you're paying for the parking. But that's, I guess, my reaction. I don't know if Rob, if you've got other thoughts or Brendan.
No, I just also can't think of your arcade example of if it's in a legacy city, you may be more likely to be getting consent from existing property owners, existing buildings. It's just a little
Mhm.
trickier.
Yeah, I think that last part about consent, you have the area that you might want to have an NCA over, you might be dealing like we are at the lakefront. We're dealing with, half a dozen um, property owners, existing holders of submerged land leases. So getting that buy-in and making sure everyone understands what the charge will actually, how that there will be benefit to their properties is, I think, important so you can get that consent if you need to deal with multiple property owners. I do want to harp on, as someone, again, who mostly works up here, having the new pay for the new is a huge, huge benefit for NCAs. It is something, when I work with Rob or Colin on projects up here, we hear all the time from we mostly represent on the public side of transaction. And one of the big concerns is having to sell to your residents why this is necessary, why some sort of incentive is necessary, and not just a handout to a developer. Well, with an NCA, it's that sales pitch is sometimes a little easier because you can say like, this is a way we are designing so that the users of this property in your community are paying for it and not shifting that burden on to existing residents or businesses. And I think that's a really important strategic way of thinking about these in legacy cities.
Patrick, I
Gentlemen,
think we have. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
go
go
for
ahead.
it.
I know we're at time. We've got one more question here, but if we're at time, that's fine.
I do want to end us because we're losing some folks and we try to be pretty consistent on time here. But maybe my final question is, if folks do have other questions, what's the best way to contact you?
Did we put them at the end, or I feel like is our contact information, Patrick, in any of the materials?
We can go ahead and send your emails out to everybody if that's appropriate.
Yeah,
We'll send the slides and we will post this as a YouTube on APA Cleveland's page as well. APA Cleveland's YouTube page.
yeah. I would encourage folks not to hesitate to reach out to us. I mean, I think all of us on this call are happy to set up a quick 15-30 minute call, not no charge or anything, just to like answer some questions, understand like, is this something that makes sense for a project or a community or something you want to have a discussion about. I'm always happy to do that, and also always happy to talk to other larger groups that if you found this valuable and you thought that there's other audience members that really would benefit from it.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan, Rob, Colin, for your time today. Really a lot of great information and a number of really interesting use cases for Cuyahoga County, Northeast Ohio, and the rest of Ohio as well. Really appreciate your time. For everyone on the call, thank you. As mentioned, this is available for CM credits. You are also going to find this webinar on our YouTube page probably in about 2 weeks, and we will send the slides out to everyone as well. If you have other ideas for webinars that you'd like to see in 2025, please get in contact with the APA Cleveland section as well. Again, on behalf of APA Cleveland, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the information. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.